Welcome back to the workshop. Hello everyone. We start with the second session of the day, and we have with us Professor Akanksha Agarwal from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and she'll be talking about linear algebra based kernels. Thank you for joining us, Akanksha. Over to you now.
So I'll be speaking about linear algebra based kernels. In the first part of the talk, we will look at matroid based techniques. So to this end, we will start by revisiting our Kruskal's algorithm for computing minimum spanning tree. This will be just for you to build a connection between how greedy algorithms and matroids are connected. After this, we will look at formal definitions of matroids, how we store at matroids, and then we will look at a very nice lemma about how we compute a representative sets. All these things will be clear as we progress in the talk. And finally, we will look at an application of the things that we discussed previously to obtain a kernel for p-hitting set. In the second part of the talk, we will look at another linear algebraic based trick to obtain a kernel for interval vertex deletion. Here the parameter will be the vertex cover number. So we will look at a brief introduction to the problem interval vertex deletion, and then we will look at a kernel. So we will look at another interesting thing as well, which I'll mention later. Okay. So let us move to our part 1 on matroids. So going back to our algorithms 101 course, recall that in the minimum spanning tree problem, we are given a graph G and we have a weight function on the edge set of the graph. And the objective is to find a spanning tree of this graph that has minimum possible weight. So let us recall how our algorithm worked for minimum spanning tree. So if you remember correctly, you would have seen two greedy algorithms for this problem. One was Kruskal's algorithm and another was Prim's algorithm. But in this talk, we will look at Kruskal's algorithm. Okay, so how does the Kruskal's algorithm work? So we start with an empty edge set and we greedily add edges to our set E prime. And since our objective is to minimize the total weight of the spanning tree, if we take the sum of the weights over all the edges that are present in our spanning tree, since our objective is to minimize that, we will pick an edge that has minimum possible weight, and still we are able to add it. So when can we add such an edge? Okay, so let us look at an edge which is outside our set E prime, okay, which is of minimum possible weight, such that even if we add E to our set E prime, if you look at graph induced on the edges that have already been selected together with this edge E, then what do is we add E to our E prime. So, and we look at all the edges for which this graph induced on E prime union E is still acyclic, and we choose the E that has minimum possible weight. So even if there are multiple such edges, we just pick one such edge arbitrarily, okay? And then we stop when we already have a spanning tree. So notice that if we look at our partial solution, so we have, say, these subset of red edges, when is it not a solution? So it is not a solution if there exists this blue edge, which we are able to add to our edge set and still ensure the property that there is no cycle in the graph induced on these edges, right? Okay. So another property, important property, which you can actually prove is that, so this property maybe you have not seen directly in your the correctness proof for Kruskal's algorithm, but this holds, is the following. So suppose we have two subsets of edges. So we are greedily in an iterative fashion building our solution, okay? So suppose we have two sets, say this white set and we have this pink set of edges. So notice that pink set has way more edges than our yellow set, white set, okay? So the additional property here that we have is, since if you look at any spanning tree of a connected graph, it has exactly n-1 edges. So you can show that if there are two subsets of edges, such that one is larger than the other one, then you can find an edge. You can find like an edge to add to your solution. Okay. So we, in particular, we added this red edge, okay, and still maintain the property that the resulting thing, if you look at the graph induced on the selected set of edges, it's still acyclic. It may not be a tree, but it's acyclic. Okay. So in my opinion, this will be helpful when we look at the formal definitions of matroid to get a natural connection and to get a feel of what these structures that I'm going to define are. Okay, so let me formally define what matroids are. So here we are given a universe, a finite size universe U, and we have a family F, which is subsets of U. Okay, these sets in F are called as independent sets, but do not confuse it with independent sets in graphs, although they have the same name, but they are very different objects. Okay. So we say that this pair U comma this family F is a matroid if the following conditions are satisfied. So firstly, empty set always belongs to this family. Okay. The second is that if you look at any set in this family, then any subset of this set A, and look at any subset A prime of this set A in our family, then that also belongs to our family F. So notice that this already encapsulates the first item. So empty set is the subset of everything. So if we just have the condition that for every set in our family, each of its subsets are also in our family, then this also includes the first item. Okay. So if you go back to your minimum spanning tree problem and look at the kind of partial solutions, like with the solution that we were recursively building. So look at a partial solution, okay? It's a forest. If you look at any subset of edges of a forest, you will still get a forest. You cannot get any cycle. So in some sense, if you look at the solution, the kind of partial solutions that you were getting in your minimum spanning tree problem, they also satisfy these properties. So the third property is that if there are two sets, okay, so if there are two sets A and B in your family F, and if size of A is smaller than that of B, then what this property says is that you can add an element, you can pick an element from B and add it to A. So actually it should be, you can even, this should be B minus A, okay? So if you have a larger set and a smaller set, you should be able to pick you should be able to find such an element in the larger set, so that if you add this element B into your set A, then you still get an independent set. The set is still in your family. Okay, so this is called as the exchange property. So if you remember when we were trying to look at our spanning tree example, there when we had this pink set and white set, what we said there was, if the number of edges in the white set is smaller than the number of edges in the pink set, then you can add some edge from the red set to your yellow, from the pink set to your white set, and still maintain the forest property. Okay, so this needs a formal proof, but this is doable. So in some sense, if you look at the partial solutions, the kind of partial solutions that we get here, and including the solution itself, then it forms a matroid. Okay, so in a sense, matroids generalize many greedy algorithms, or in other words, it explains why certain greedy algorithms work. I must remark here that matroids cannot encapsulate all greedy algorithms. So there are greedy algorithms. For instance, even for computing minimum spanning tree, I do not think we know how we can encode Prince algorithm as a matroid. Okay, with the kind of partial solutions that we get there. And the reason being, there we start with a particular vertex. Okay, so there are greedy algorithms which cannot be seen as like independent sets in matroid, but matroids do generalize many greedy algorithms, and in a sense they provide an explanation why certain greedy algorithms work. So this was our formal definition for matroids. Now let us look at how we can use matroids in the context of designing polynomial kernels. So if you recall correctly, when we are designing a kernel, we neither know a solution nor are interested in computing a solution. So our objective is to compress the instance. Our objective is to create another instance whose size is much smaller. And how do we quantify this much smaller is by the parameter. And typically we want it to be polynomial. Okay. So suppose we are given a set B. Okay. So this is an example of how the things like matroids can be used in the context of designing kernels. Okay. So suppose I give you a set B. Think of B as a solution or a partial solution. Okay. So then we have to ask, what forbids B from being a solution? So particularly, if we are not storing the whole input, we are throwing away a part of this input, then it should not happen that B wasn't previously a solution and B turned into a solution in our new instance. So here I am assuming a simple case where solutions are more or less preserved. Okay. So actually, the point is that probably there is some set A which together with B, if you look at them together, it gives you, like, it proves to you that look, this is the reason why B cannot be a solution. So here let us understand this with an example. Okay. So suppose if we are looking at the problem K path. Okay. This set B can be K path itself. So it can be a set of K vertices which have a path, which form a long path, or there is a path containing each of these vertices. So if for this problem, so if we are given a set of vertices and it does not form a path, then we know just by looking at B that it is not a solution, right? But let us look at, so in which case A can be empty too. But let us look at another situation. Say somebody is claiming to you that B is a vertex cover. Okay. So the point is, what can A be here? Okay. So suppose this set they are claiming to be a vertex cover, but there exists some two vertices U and B in the like G minus B, so that they have an edge between them and none of U or B is in our set B. So notice that this A with two vertices U and B together with B gives you an evidence that okay, B is not a solution. Okay. So when you're trying to throw away things, when you're trying to reduce your instance, you have to be careful when you're throwing this. So you shouldn't. So if B was not previously a solution, if in some sense the instances that you're creating are solution preserving in a sense, then B should not become a solution, right? Because then in the reverse direction, while you're starting with a solution for your new instance and trying to construct a solution for your original instance, there will be a problem. Because if B has size, say exactly K, and you're looking for a K size solution, you will not have a budget to include anything, right? Okay. So the point is, we have many such potential B's. Okay, the such potential B's may be as large as n to the k if we are looking for k size solution. So let us look at the designing kernels in the context, like when the parameter is the solution size. Okay, so if we are trying to preserve A for every B, okay, because we do not know B. The solution B is unknown to us and we are not even interested in computing a solution. We are interested in compressing our solution, right? Okay. So if you're trying to keep such an evidence A for every B, it may be very, very expensive. Particularly, look at the case when B has size n to the k. If you're trying to keep, if your parameter is k, you cannot afford to keep like one private A for every, right? The second thing is that the size of A can itself be very large. Say size of A is some n by 2, for example. Okay, then there is a problem, because if you are trying to preserve evidences that certain sets are not solutions, then if you even try to preserve one such set, it has size n by 2. How do you keep it, right? So let us simplify our life. Consider the case when we have small a. Okay, so a has very small size, say a constant size. So if you recall the vertex cover example, there the kind of evidence that we needed was just two more vertices, right? We needed two more vertices in the set. Okay, so we have simplified our lives. We are only, say, interested in small a's. But the first problem didn't go over, right? If we have many potential B's and we are trying to keep an evidence that B is probably not a solution, then we have n power k many, we can have as large as n power k many things. So what if we try to reuse the same A for many B's? Okay, then you do not have to keep a private copy of A for every B, right? So maybe one A is sufficient for many B's. So if you look at, in particular, the vertex cover example that I gave you, so any set B or B prime, any set which excludes both U and B, okay, say this is your A, this A will work for both B and B prime to give an evidence that, look, no, your B or B prime cannot be a solution. So this gives us some hope of reusing the same A for multiple B's. Okay. So, and it turns out that it is possible. So here, yes is in quotes. Yes, if the family, look at the family induced by this. So if your family has A union B, where B is such potential solutions, okay, and you have this A as evidence. If this A union B, if you include each subset in your family, if this forms a matroid, then such a thing is possible. Like reusing the same A for many B's is possible, okay? But here I have put yes in quotation because there are practical constraints, okay? And the constraint is that, look, you have n to the k many, say as large as n to the k many B's, okay? Look at, even if you have one fixed A serving as an evidence for everybody, then also the number of independent sets that are there in this family will be as large as n to the k. So how will you specify your matroid? So you cannot write this u comma f, right? Because this can have size as large as n to the k, and you cannot spend that much time. Okay, so this is why we will look at what is called as representable matroids. Okay, so which allows us to represent matroids in a reasonable amount of space. Okay, so and here again I would like to note that not all matroids are representable. So the second thing that we will look at is how do we reuse it? Okay. So for this we will look at the notion of representatives. Okay. How can we keep this representative for the potential B's, and how we can still keep a small like a small number of A's, and still that will be sufficient. This will be covered in our topic representative sets. So let us first concentrate on the first part, where we want our matroids to be representable in a reasonable amount of space. So why should a matroid be representable in a reasonable amount of space, right? First, like, are we demanding too much? Because you are trying to say that there are exponential, there are n to the k many sets in the family, and you are trying to, you are allowing me space like, I don't know, million.
Hello. Yeah, yeah. Akansha, your audio is not there working. Maybe
You're
unmute.
you're muted, Akansha. Just unmute yourself. That's all.
He's on two devices, so maybe try the other one. Like,
Sorry, I think my broadcasting also stopped. I have to rejoin because of some connectivity issue.
okay. Your audio and video is fine now. Maybe The slides might have an issue. You can check that.
Am I audible now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So can you make me the host?
Oh, okay. So you want the other? Okay, just a minute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, done. I think that should work.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. And
Okay, so so I hope was I audible till this slide?
okay. Yeah, till here I think you were. Yeah, you can start with the next one again, I guess.
Okay. Okay. So if you look at our minimum spanning tree example, if you look at the kind of partial solutions we have there, they are forest, right? So notice that to store all possible forest in a given graph, we don't actually need to store all such stuff for like forest explicitly. We can store it implicitly. In particular, we can store it as a graph itself, right? So if I give you the set of vertices and give you the set of edges, then given any subset of edges, I can test whether or not it's an independent set or whether or not it's a forest in my graph. It's a polynomial time procedure. So this gives us some hope that maybe we don't need to store the families in the matroid explicitly. Okay. So here, graph is a way of storing this subsets of like set containing all forest in an implicit fashion. Okay. So now let us look at now the matroids. So we say that a matroid U comma F is representable if there is a matrix where the number of where for each element in your universe you associate a column with it. For instance, here with x1 you have associated first column, with x2 you have this red column, and so on. Okay, and the condition that you have is a subset of U is in your family F if and only if the corresponding set of columns is linearly independent. So this is over a field, okay? And say your subset is say x1 and x2, then look at these two blue and red columns, the first and the second column. If x1, x2 as a set belongs to your family, then these two blue and red sets should be linearly independent, and so on. Such matroids are called as representable matroids. Again, not all matroids are representable, okay? So one matroid which will be of particular interest to us in this talk is called as a uniform matroid. So here we are given a universe U, and the family is all, so there exists, so U comma F is a matroid, a uniform matroid, if there exists an integer k such that every subset of U of size at most k belongs to our family, and this is the whole of the family. Okay, there are no additional sets in our family. Okay, this is what a uniform matroid is, and we know that this matroids are representable and such a representation can be computed efficiently. Okay, so we somehow have gotten past our first problem that our candidate B's are very large. So even if we have matroids on A union B, then we cannot store the family, but we do not need to store the family. We can have a compact or an implicit representation of all such sets. Okay. Now let us look at the second part where we want to keep a small number of representatives for all B's. Okay. We do not want one private representative for every B because otherwise the size will be a lot. We cannot afford that in a kernelization algorithm. So now let us focus on this. So to this end, let me introduce what is called as representative sets. Here we are given, suppose consider a matroid U comma F and a family A of p-side sets in this family F, okay, in the matroid. Then we say that a subset A prime of our given family calligraphic A, Q represents, Q is an integer, okay? Q represents this given family A if the following holds. So if there is a B, if there is a subset B of U of size Q, for which there is some A in our original family, given family calligraphic A, says that firstly A and B are disjoint. Secondly, A union B is in our family. It's an independent set in our matroid. Okay. So let us first try to parse this and understand it in the context of what we were discussing previously. So what it is saying is the B here is the same as this B. So you can think like to intuitively understand it. So the B we are talking about here can be thought of as this potential future B that you do not know, which can be a candidate solution, for instance. And the A here, the A that you were having in your family. So originally you had all certificates for every B because you are given with the input, right? And you have not removed anything. But so now this A here is same as this A here. So it is saying that A and B are disjoint and kind of A union B is a certificate of things that you wanted. Okay. So, okay, now coming back to the definition. So if there is a B, so if there is a B, okay, with which you can fit an A so that certain things happen, in particular these things happen, okay, then you should also have, this is A prime, okay, you should also have some A prime in your family such that a similar property can be achieved. In particular, it should also be disjoint from B, and A prime should also serve as an evidence of kind of things that you wanted. Okay, so in particular, in this context, we want A prime union B to be in our family, to be an independent set in our matrix. Okay. So note that what this property is saying is, so okay, maybe you don't keep this private A for every B, but you can keep some other A prime in your B, which serves as an evidence for many B's for the kind of properties you want. Okay, so this is what that is saying, and I'm stating this very informally. So given a matroid representation, we can compute such an A prime of size at most P plus Q choose Q in time bounded by size of A into roughly time bounded by size of A into P plus Q choose P into P to the order 1. Okay. So now let's use this the kind of definitions we saw till now to obtain a polynomial kernel for D-Hilting set problem. So here I'm assuming a simplification, which is not really like a big simplification. It's a minor technicality, and this does not change whatever I'm discussing. But for simplicity, let me state it this way. So recall that in the D-Hilting set problem, we have a universe U and a family A over U of sets of size exactly D. Here I am using sets of size exactly D, okay? And we are given an integer K. And the question is to test whether there is a B, subset of the universe of size at most K, that intersects every set in A? Okay, this is the question. So now we will try to use Matroid to construct a kernel for this problem. Recall that you have already seen a kernel for d-hitting set using sunflower lemma. So this is another kernel for the same problem. So suppose like look at this universe U. This universe is the same as this universe. Okay, and let F contain each subset of U which has size at most k plus d. Okay. So notice that this is what was our definition of uniform. This is the definition of our uniform Matroid over this universe U, right? And this we know that it's representable. So we can compute a representation of it in polynomial time. Now what do we do is, recall our other result about representative sets about computing this A prime, which is size P plus Q choose P. Okay, which was which preserved this kind of property. Okay, and still was able to throw away certain sets in the given family A. So using this, the result that was presented in the previous slide, we compute A prime, a family A prime subset of A, which K represents A. K is the solution size, okay? K is the same as K, okay? And now what we do is, to obtain our kernel, we throw all sets throw all sets not in A prime, okay? So to get our new family, or in other words, we just keep A prime and throw elements in U that are not in any sets in A. So now we get an instance of another hitting set here, and we keep the integer k the same. So let's see why this is okay. Okay, so we need to prove that the original instance and the new instance that we created are equivalent. So if notice that if we have a solution solution B here, it will necessarily be a solution here, because B intersects each set in our given family, and the subfamily that we have kept is actually a subset of the given family, right? So if it intersected each set in this, those sets are present here also, and there are no new sets. So this is why so if you have a solution B to the original instance, that serves as a solution to your new instance as well. So the interesting thing is the reverse direction. So suppose you have a solution B here for your new instance. So this instance, okay? So if B intersects each set in A, you're done, right? Because it is a solution and it is of size at most K we kept the same. So now suppose that it is not the case, in which case we have this B, which is a solution, and there is some set A in this family A, so that firstly, A intersection B is empty, and note that since A and B are disjoint, A has size D, B has size K. So A union B has size K plus D. So since F is U comma F is a uniform matroid, A union B is in your family, right? What does this mean? This means that since A prime, this is your subfamily A prime, K represents the family A, there is some A prime in your family that you have kept, such that A prime also is disjoint from B, and this is actually enough here. So if you can find a set in your family, subfamily A prime, which does not intersect B, then this contradicts that B is a solution, right? So that's it. And this is why we can say that such a thing cannot happen. So the instances are equivalent. So this gives us a kernel for d-hitting set, where the number of sets is k plus d choose k, and the elements is like take union over all the sets. Each set is of size d. So the number of elements you get in the universe is k plus in the universe is at most k plus d choose d into d. So this was what I had to speak about the first part about matroids, and now we will look at a polynomial kernel for the interval vertex solution problem when the parameter is the vertex cover number. So first, let me start by defining what an interval graph is. So here, suppose we are given a set of line segments on the real line. So they say these line segments are given, pink, green, yellow, and this blue line segments. So what we do is we create a vertex for each of these line segments and add an edge between two vertices if and only if their intervals intersect. So for example, we have added this edge here between the pink vertex and green vertex because their intervals are intersecting in this part. Okay, whereas we did not add an edge between this pink vertex and this blue vertex because their intervals do not intersect. So we add an edge if and only if the corresponding intervals are intersecting. So this is what and a graph is a given graph is an interval graph if you can come up with such an interval. So you can associate with every vertex an interval in the real line, so that you have an edge between a pair of vertices if and only if the corresponding intervals are intersecting. Okay. So given a graph, there can be so many ways of associating interval, right? Like a line segment in the real line. So how do you determine whether the given graph is an interval graph? So there are multiple ways to do this, but the one that will be useful for us is based on forbidden induced subgraph characterization, and this is the following. So it states that the given graph is an interval graph if and only if it contains none of the graphs shown in this picture as an induced subgraph. Okay, so this is a cycle on at least 4 vertices, induced cycle. All these graphs are induced. Okay, so it says that your graph is an interval if and only if it does not contain any of these as an induced subgraph. Okay, so we will call these graphs shown in this picture as obstructions. So in the interval vertex deletion problem, we are given as input a graph G and an integer K. And the question is to test if there exists a vertex subset S of size at most K, so that the resulting graph is an interval graph. Okay, and here we are interested in the kernelization complexity of this problem when the parameter is the vertex cover number, not the integer K, which is our solution size. Okay. So to design such a kernel, we will look at two key ingredients in such a kernel, in our kernelization algorithm. First will be on computing what we call a redundant solution, and the second will be a linear algebraic trick, which will help us finally obtain the kernel. If you have designed kernel, you may be aware that certain times having an approximate solution is really helpful, because if you look at the remaining portion of the graph, it is very structured. And additionally, you have the property that if you look at any obstruction, then it intersects your approximate solution. It cannot be completely contained in G minus A if A is an approximate solution. So the first question we ask here is that can we strengthen our approximate solution so that if we look at any obstruction in the graph, then it intersects our solution in at least in more than C vertices. Okay. So the point is that such a thing can be structurally useful. The reason is that it, in a sense, allows us to forget about small obstructions. And remember, it is a kernel, not a branching algorithm where we can just branch for, like if we have an obstruction of size 4, branch and be done with it. So obstructions remain in our graph, okay? So such a thing can be actually structurally very useful. But the question to ask here is, like, are we asking for too much? Can we even achieve? So forget about how to compute such a thing. Does there even exist such an object? Okay. For example, if you look at our obstructions to interval graphs, it contains a cycle on 4 vertices, the small cycle. So if C is 100, how can a cycle on 4 vertices intersect in 100 vertices, right? It does not even has enough vertices to intersect. Okay, so this is one problem. The other problem is, what if, say the first problem doesn't happen? We are able to say take all small obstructions and put all the vertices in that into the approximate solution and still be able to say something, but there are more problems to this. Suppose we have many obstructions that intersect in few vertices, say in this left figure, many obstructions, we have a sunflower-like structure of obstructions which intersect in exactly one vertex. But then what do we do? If we are insisting that our approximate solution must include, say, even if C is at least 2, then it's a problem, because we cannot, if we add even one more from each obstructions, the solution size may blow up. And we want, whenever we are looking for approximate solution or strengthen approximate solution, in order for us to use them properly, it should be of reasonable size. It should be, particularly if we are trying to design polynomial kernel, the size should be some polynomial in K, roughly speaking, okay? So here you might say that, okay, why not pick this center vertex? Okay, it intersects all the so many obstructions, and this vertex, since it is part of so many obstructions which can be intersected only by this vertex, why not just delete it? But this problem actually generalizes to larger sets, maybe not very large, but say if we have many obstructions intersecting in two vertices. In particular, if you look at this right figure, you have these two red vertices, you have this garland of obstruction. So if you look at any two such chains, any two such paths, you get a cycle. And now you do not know whether to pick the left red vertex or right red vertex into your solution. So picking vertices into your solution is not possible here, right? So, and if we try to put more vertices from each of these obstructions, the solution size, the strengthened solution that we are looking for will have many vertices. But actually there is an interesting thing that we can do. So note that these many obstructions are intersected by these two red vertices, right? So we know that one of these two red vertices must necessarily belong to our solution, and this is like a very like constant many vertices. So using this, we cannot achieve what we wanted to achieve, but we can actually achieve something very close to it, and which is firstly possible to do, and also we can compute such a thing efficiently. So let us look at one such thing. So this is what we call as a C redundant solution. So here, what is a C redundant solution? So we have a set S, a subset S of vertices, and we have the remaining graph. And additionally, we have this pink sets, the family calligraphic W. So these pink sets are like subsets of S. And say this family W we can find this family W and S efficiently, okay? But let us look at the properties that the set S together with this family W provides us. So firstly, if we have any solution which is of small size, and for us small is like K, okay? Any solution which is of size at most K must be a hitting set for this family W. So if I try to correlate it from our previous example, so look at these two red vertices. We know that one of these two red vertices must necessarily be in our solution. So for instance, these two red vertices will be a set in my family W, okay? So firstly we have the property that any solution which is of size at most K must be a hitting set for this family. And second is that if you look at any obstruction in the graph, then either this obstruction contains more than C vertices from S, in which case we are very happy. This is the kind of thing we wanted to achieve from an obstruction. Otherwise, this obstruction is already taken care by the hitting set property. So notice that, what does it mean? So it means that there is some pink set in our family W, which is completely contained in this obstruction. So note that any solution is a hitting set for this pink set. So if we remove a solution, then this obstruction is already taken care of. So when we are designing our reduction rules, we in a sense can ignore small like obstructions which are already taken care by the hitting set property, and focus only on those obstructions which are not taken care by the hitting set property, in which case we have that this obstruction contains more than C vertices from S. And this is something that we would like to exploit. So the kind of C redundant solutions I described, we can come up with an efficient algorithm to compute such a redundant solution. So, and efficient is here polynomial time. We can compute it in polynomial time, and we assume that C is a constant. So now let us go back to our kernel for interval vertex deletion when parameterized by the vertex cover number. So here X is a vertex cover and we have independent set, so there is no edge. So note that an independent set is trivially an interval graph, like place the intervals far enough so that no two of them intersect. So this is an interval graph. So in particular, X is an approximate solution. So in my previous slide, when I said we can compute such a solution, actually we can compute such a solution even with when we are given an approximate solution, we can strengthen it to have this property. So we can ensure that the given approximate solution is a subset of S. That also we can achieve. Okay. So this is a solution. So it contains, every obstruction contains at least one vertex from X. We strengthen it to compute a C redundant solution where C is say 10. Or 100. Choose your favorite constant, which is something like larger than 10 or 10. Okay. And this S, we can guarantee that because X is of size L, the strengthened solution we get is also of reasonable size. And the reasonable thing is quantified by the size of the approximate solution. So we can ensure that S that we obtain is also of size polynomial in L using the same algorithm that I was mentioning. Okay. So now we focus on the below part of the graph. If it is already bounded, then we will be done. So fix a polynomial function, and if the number of vertices in G minus S is already polynomial in L, then we are done. Otherwise, we will try to find an irrelevant vertex and delete it, and still ensure the property that we don't change the answer. So original instance is a yes instance if and only if the instance that we obtain after removing an irrelevant vertex is also a yes instance. Okay. So let us look at some useful observations that we get using this family. So recall that when we have the strengthened approximate solution, the C redundant solution S, along with that, we also have this family W. Those were the pink sets in the figure that I had shown previously. So let us look at a pair of non-adjacent vertices in S such that UV is not also a set in my family W. Okay. So now notice that if U and V have many common neighbors, in particular, even if they have like say 2 common neighbors, they form a cycle, and this is 4 vertices. So this obstruction does not contain more than C vertices. So first property is not satisfied. So the second property must be satisfied, that it is taken care by the hitting set property, in which case since this cycle on 4 vertices intersects this set S in only 2 vertices, this UV must be a set in W. So recall that this family W is a family of subsets of S. Okay, so it does not contain vertices from here. So this UV must be in our family W, and which contradicts our assumption. So in particular, what have we obtained here? So if you look at a pair of vertices which are non-adjacent and this UV is not a set in our family, then it can have at most 1 common neighbor in G minus S. So let's mark them because there are just S choose 2 many of them, which is poly in L choose 2, which is still a polynomial in L. So we mark them. So now if you look at any vertex which is below in G minus S, which is unmarked, so we have marked this dark gray vertices are marked vertices and we have other vertices here. So if you look at any vertex which is unmarked and look at its neighborhood in S, say pick any 2 neighbors of it in S, say UV, then we can see that its neighborhood is almost a click. And the reason is that either UV is adjacent, okay, in which case like we have the edge property, like we have an edge between them that is a click-like property. So if you are looking a pair of neighbors, it has an edge between them. Otherwise, by our previous observation, we know that UV in such case should be in our family W. So either this obstruction is useless for us, or what we have is that if you look at this vertex, its neighborhood is almost a click. So any obstruction which contains this vertex, either we don't care about this obstruction, or if you look at the relevant part which is like interesting to us, that part of the neighborhood is a click, and that is actually very useful. So for instance, so here, look at an obstruction O which is containing an unmarked vertex. Say it contains an unmarked vertex W. It can contain several unmarked vertex, but say it contains at least one unmarked vertex W. So we are only interested in obstructions which contain more than C vertices. Okay, so we forget about those that are taken care by the hitting set property. So this is not covered by say our hitting set property. Then the following goes. So since it is a large obstruction, it cannot be these two things. These have 7 vertices, and like our C is say 10. Now let us, so our obstruction that is interesting to us should be one of these 3. Okay, of course this is an infinite family of obstructions, but it is of one of these 3 types. So just a notation here, these vertices will be called non-shallow terminals, and this is shallow terminals and this is non-shallow terminals. Okay, great. So now let us look at an obstruction which is a cycle containing an unmarked vertex. Notice that, look at its neighbors in the cycle U and V. So we are only interested in obstructions that are not taken care by the hitting set property. They are the interesting obstructions to us. So it is not covered by the hitting set property. Then you notice that U and V are in S, okay? Because X is an independent set. If you look at any vertex below, its neighborhood can only be in S. So, and U, V, none of U or V can be in W. So none of this obstruction is not taken care by the hitting set property. So we can obtain that this pair, the set containing U and V is not in our family. Also, it is non-adjacent, right? So why was W not marked? We have marked such vertices. So W should have been marked. So this says that actually our obstruction cannot be even cycle. It should be one of these 2 below graphs. And we can further show that it is one of these vertices T's by using similar arguments. This T1, TL, TR, or T. Okay, T here, TL, or TR. We can further show that with some more marking that it's actually not just a terminal, one of these T, TL, TR vertices, but it's a shallow terminal. So shallow terminal is this vertex, okay? So we will only focus on the first type of obstruction. The second can be handled in a similar fashion. So suppose we have a long path which is part of the obstruction. Let us look at an unmarked vertex W. Notice that W cannot have 3 neighbors in this path, because if it has 3 neighbors, this is an induced path. Then we will have an independent set of size 2 in the neighborhood of W, in which case we know that this obstruction is taken care by the hitting set property, because U and V is either an edge, which is not the case because it's an induced path, and otherwise it's in our family. So using this, we can say that the neighborhood of any unmarked vertex W, if you look at an induced path, which is interesting to us, it is either adjacent to just one vertex or an edge. Okay. So because we have marked W otherwise, okay. So now we have this property, and let us look at how we can eliminate vertices from below. So look at a vertex U from S. For every U in S, we will be doing the following procedure. Let this set AU is those vertices which are neighbors of U, okay? So when we are looking at an obstruction where our marked vertex is a terminal, we are looking at its neighbor. That neighbor is U, okay? So in particular, if you look at this T, this is an unmarked vertex, suppose, then C is equal to U in our previous example. So for every such candidate C equals to U, we will do the following procedure. What we do is we create a vector which is of length size of s minus 1. So basically it has entry corresponding to every vertex in S apart from U, this vertex under consideration, and it has an entry corresponding to every edge completely contained in S which is not incident to U. Okay, so these are the edges. So now how we create this vector is for a vertex here x1, if W is adjacent to it, we put a 1, otherwise we do not put a 1. And if it is adjacent to, so if there is an edge here, look at the corresponding entry. If W is adjacent to both of them, we put 1 here, otherwise we put 0. Okay, so this is how we create vectors, and now we have a set of vectors corresponding to all our vertices in AU. What we do is we compute a basis of this vectors, and we do it k plus 1 times. The reason we want to repeat it k plus 1 times is so that at least for one of these, so if we have a solution of size k, we will have one basis which is the vertices corresponding to it is completely untouched by the solution, and this is why we want to repeat it k plus 1 times. Okay, and now what we want to do is delete the unmarked vertices. So say we have deleted an unmarked vertex W from G to obtain G prime. So notice that if we have a solution Y here for G, since G prime is a subgraph of G, we can show that Y is also a solution for G prime. There is some hereditary property here. So the interesting case is when we have, so is the reverse direction where we have a solution Y for G prime, and we are trying to say that Y is also a solution for G. Okay, so suppose it is not a solution, in which case we have an obstruction, and note that this obstruction must contain an unmarked vertex, and since G and G prime differ only at W, this obstruction contains W, and the interesting obstruction for us is when W is this terminal, okay, this vertex. So let us focus on this path below and restrict the entries to the vertices and edges which are present in this path. Okay, so recall that we had done for every such U. Okay, so in particular we have kept many things corresponding to this U. Okay, so since W was not in any of the bases, we have a basis which is untouched by the solution Y. Okay, and W can be expressed as a linear combination of these vectors. Okay, so now let us restrict these vectors to the entries that are relevant to these paths, this path and the last entry 1. So we can say that there should be a Wj whose, if you look at the sum of the entries, that is 1. So particularly first understand why some of the entries of the vectors for this vertex W in this part is 1. Note that W is adjacent to U and nothing else. Okay, so there is an entry 1 here. Sorry, and we were doing it only for vertices. So notice that x1 to x s minus 1. So since W is not adjacent to anybody here, in this part there is no 1. It's all 0. So at the end we have a 1. So if you look at the sum of the entries, it is 1 for W. Now let us look at the linear combination of the vectors that give us W. So the claim is that there is some Wj where the sum of the entries is also 1. So for example, if this is the case, then it will be a replacement for W. So let us understand this. So recall that Wj can have at most 2 neighbors here. Suppose it has one neighbor B here. B must be in S. So B has an entry here, so it will be 1. And so just a minute. So if first let me clarify this. Okay, so why there should be a Wj where sum of the entries is 1? Notice that if you take the column wise sum of these vectors Wi's, and if you take the sum of the column in W, this is same as taking the sum over the rows of each of these vectors. So think of them as matrix. Okay, so if the sum totally you're getting a 0, so it doesn't matter whether you take the sum like horizontally or vertically. This is why such a Wj exists. Okay, so now the claim is that this is a replacement for W, this Wj. If not, it is adjacent to somebody, and it can be adjacent to at most 2 such things. So suppose it is adjacent to B2. Here B2, the corresponding entry will be 1, and it is not adjacent to anybody else. If it has exactly one neighbor, then we will get 1 plus 1, 0, which contradicts that the sum of the corresponding entries is 1. If it has two neighbors, then corresponding to B3, B2, B3, and the edge B2, B3, these are 3 ones. Together with this last one, we get 4 ones, which is 0. So this is why this cannot happen, and we get that Wj is a replacement for W. So to conclude, if we remove all the irrelevant unmarked vertices, then we obtain a polynomial kernel for interval vertex deletion, parameterized by the vertex cover number. To conclude, we saw 2 algebraic techniques that can be useful in obtaining polynomial kernels. And we also saw, so here I will end with a remark that interval vertex deletion also has a polynomial kernel when parameterized by the solution size, using the ideas similar to the ones that I presented, but it is much more complicated. So with this, I will end. Thank you.